again to another segment of the Grassy Knoll, and with us today is Andrew Colvin. You know him from the Mothman prophecies. We've done a lot about that, and also I want to tell everybody that we have the, I guess it's 6 previous shows on the audio archives. So by all means, go there and check it out. This would be segment 7, and so we've I don't know if you know that, Andy, but we put them up there because a lot of people have been asking them, to hear about the whole 9 yards, and so they're up there, as well as the Informer series. And with us from the state of Washington is Andrew Colvin, and thanks for being with us, Andrew.
Thank you, Viz.
Now, it's been a while since we did our last record. Of course, everybody heard the last segment we did, and that would be just this last Friday. Actually, that would be 2 weeks ago. Understanding when we're going to play this, which would be May 19th. But you indicated to me that some things have gone on. You've heard some things, and I know you have a blog, and I guess a lot of stuff goes on there. I stay away from them all, I have to tell you. So, for starters, why don't you catch me up on what's taken place in the time that we've done the shows and in the time that we've done the last one, at least the last one aired.
The last one that aired was the 5th one.
Was it the 5th? I can't count. That's not a problem. I do this all the time.
That was my favorite, I think. But the 5th and 6th are the best, and the 5th one you just broadcast last Friday, and that's the one that talks about the Frightwig, who Frightwig was, and in my mind, that's an important development, just for that knowledge to be out there. And there's kind of been a very odd silence, and that's typically what happens after there's, at least after I've put out some new piece of information. There's typically like nothing said for a few days, and then there's always usually every time there's some odd thing, somebody does something to try to throw you off, and it's almost a pattern. It's very similar, I think, to what Keel experienced back then. Still going on.
All right, now you've been very general, and of course we're just starting out, so you might be working to where you're going. What do you mean by they throwing you off?
Well, this is mostly, and I agree with you about the blogs. I actually have not written much lately. I've taken off probably about a month where I just haven't, written to any of the lists or anything. But the lists tend to be to have these people on there who are very interesting, and the rumor is that half of them are government people. I mean, that's the big rumor, I guess, in the conspiracy world right now, is that they've infiltrated various lists and have these people in there who are trying all kinds of strange. I mean, it's almost like a sociological experiment that's going on. And in some ways, I think there's a natural explanation for a lot of it, which kind of relates to the research of Puhark, who I've talked about before, who may have been the mind control scientist who was tinkering in the background of the Mothman. And some of his theories and some of his research are closely allied with how the mind works, and it's a reflexive phenomenon that responds to you as you do things within it, as you encounter it. And I've been sort of pushing the idea that the grassroots folks out there need to tap into this and to use it to do research, because I can tell you for sure that the elites are doing it. They are tapping into this phenomenon and trying to manipulate it, because it's basically a neutral oracle, and it can be, there are some people with dark motives who I think try to use the power of it to enhance their various operations, the Illuminati, you might say.
All right, I agree with you totally. Excuse me, but now why would you have men in suits want to insinuate themselves into what's going on with regard to the discussion about the Mothman situation, and also, all the other issues around it?
Well, I think it's a big, big story. It's a big, big, powerful tool, and the occult elites and the occult go way back, and there's it's a lot of it has to do with money, I think. And
but what are they afraid of with regard to the information you're putting out? I mean, I'm playing a bit, for lack of better words.
Part of it is just the way we've become, I think, in the last 50 years as a society. We have a lot of resistance to the truth, and it's because of the programming going out on the mass media, and it's you just have, I think, a lot of it again is a natural explanation of you get a group of people together, and I've done some research on small groups. You get enough people together, I forget the number, but suddenly you have archetypal roles popping up in how people behave. It's all subconscious almost.
When you say archetypal, you'll find in any group somebody will be like an alpha, somebody will be a beta, you'll have somebody being this and that, like a jury.
Exactly.
Okay.
And you find this, and you find that the minute you go into something that's really kind of less out there, more probable, are some of these classic scams and classic crimes that when they happen to hurt children, it seems like this phenomenon kicks in. It just has a real it has a moral code to it somehow. And for instance, I think I mentioned before that at the site of these sightings on our neighborhood street, there had been a school there that had burned down. I still don't have firm, info on if kids died in it or not, but Puharich, in his research, I just read one of his books. I've got 3 or 4 of them, and they're very scientific, but he has one called Beyond Telepathy that I want to talk about a bit here.
Okay.
At some point in the thing here, I want to talk. There's several points in it that are interesting, and one of them is this idea. He studied shamans, and there's some evidence that burning flesh fuels spirit activity.
Amongst those who are alive.
What it does is it fuels the area.
Okay. All right, so
what we're talking about here is we're kind of talking about a geomagnetic anomaly that's coming out of the Earth, but we're also talking about events that can happen on the surface that are human-based that can influence the geomagnetic anomaly. Because what you have, and this is Puharich's main thrust in his book, is that you have a psi plasma field out there. It's a field, Keel calls it the superspectrum, and it is this ether, used to be called the ether in the old days, that transmits information faster than light. It's the superluminal state. And so this field is out there, and it allows it to pass through the Earth. I mean, the particles are so small. At the level of Puharich's research, he's studying positrons, or at least he's commenting on them. He's more or less a doctor, so he's doing his research is mostly on people, but he knows a lot about physics and talks about positrons and electrons and how whenever you bombard an atom with radioactivity, you end up with an electron and a positron. And the positron, for a split second, will fade out of this dimension and into the anti-dimension, if you will. And then it fixes itself really quickly. But these positrons are so small that they can, if you dropped one, if you're able to just drop one from your hand, it would pass through the Earth and out the other side. Nothing like earth or metal or anything rock would stop it. It's so small. So at that level, there's all this space. When you're down at that level, reality is just all space. And that's where the Garuda lives. The Garuda is the deity of spaces. And spaces, frequencies, oscillations, all the areas between points. It's all the negative space in the universe. The Buddhists, bring in the Garuda to symbolize that. And interestingly, it is a winged being. And people see this winged being and wonder why it's there. And I think that it is it's information being transmitted through the ether, if you will. And it tends to crop up more at times of crisis and times of big social change.
All right, a couple things here, if you would. You said burning flesh. I have to go back to that. I guess excites, arouses, whatever. Spiritual activity. I thought you meant amongst those that are living, but you're saying that in that proximity, that area, regardless of those who are embodied or whatever, you'll see some kind of increase in that. Is that right?
You would, I'm guessing it's any kind of flesh, really, that's burning. It's going to. There's a widespread indigenous idea out there, a belief in the world that this will give more fuel to spirits.
Okay. All right, so it's not necessarily amongst those who are, sentient and alive. It would probably, and I'm trying to understand this. Believe me, it would probably increase the awareness or the activity or whatever it is of whatever's in the ethos and on the earth in that particular area, so to speak. I'm assuming this is somewhat also fixed to a geographical area. In other words, if it happens someplace in West Virginia, those in California are not necessarily going to know about this, or am I wrong?
I don't know. Puhart doesn't really go into that part of it. But I just found that there were several things that he mentioned as he went through all the different kinds of research he did in his books, and some of them really seem to plug into some aspect or help illuminate some part of the story.
All right, now, go ahead. I'm sorry, Andrew. You want me to continue my line of questioning?
Sure.
All right. The second thing is about the winged being. Now, in fairness, I did see the photograph you posted about 9/11 with that winged being, and I saw that probably days after 9/11 occurred, and I pretty much figured that was a Photoshop operation. But beyond that, I know you may want to speak to that, but are you also saying that in times of crisis, it is not unusual for a sighting of a winged being to be evident?
That's right. And so the question kind of starts to become, how do you interpret them, the sightings? Is this sighting, are all the sightings related to some overarching message? Or are they separate? East Coast, West Coast, whatever. I mean, then that's a good question, and I'm not sure I have the answer. I know that every time there's been a sighting, since I started about 5 years ago, there's some link back to the central to the sort of matrix I've been noticing in all this. It's like the petals of a flower. If you follow the edge of a petal of the flower, you go out. You think you're going out into a tangent with so many of these things, and then sure enough, there's a link back to the central thesis every time almost. And I had a good example in my head earlier about that, but I'll probably come up with it as we go along here. a good example of that loop back.
Okay. Of course, I was very interested throughout this whole series with what you recounted about what takes place in West Virginia. That probably, to me, was most prevalent. I'm not sure about the Mothman. I'm not decrying it or saying it is or not. It's a tough one, but certainly the activities and where this all emanates from is extremely interesting. And I've gotten a lot of emails to the effect of, what does take place in West Virginia. Of course, the Manson situation and his. Now, is it his alleged last name, or is it in fact his real last name, Maddox?
Well, I guess legally it's Manson, but his mother's name was Maddox.
Okay, would that be a?
Father's name was not Manson; it was Scott.
Okay,
supposedly.
So he comes up with Manson, though his father's name is Scott and his mother's name is Maddox.
Yeah, somebody came up with Manson.
All right, and does she come from the Maddox family? Is kind of renowned in a sense. Is this the same Maddox family that's known, I guess? Is it in the environs of West Virginia that the family is prominent?
It's still a mystery. I don't know much about her family. I know that she was friends with Larry Flint's mother.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay. And I saw Larry Flint on TV yesterday.
Really?
I always loved Larry Flint in a way for his outspoken political views.
Mm-hmm.
And one wonders about his shooting. He got shot it was less than a month after he posted $1 million
reward
for information on the JFK assassination. And at that time, his lawyer, well, I don't know if he was his lawyer, but he was involved with what's his name? Mark Lane.
Okay. Who wrote Plausible Denial? Yeah.
Yeah, and Mark Lane, as people probably, I guess you have to go pretty far back in the conspiracy world to know that he had this big feud with Mae Brussel, who I talked about earlier. And Mae Brussel, who has no motive. Lane has always had certain motives, and he was at Jonestown. He was there at the time it happened. He's been involved in lots of big cases that have mind control, covert ops written all over them.
Okay.
And she, was suspicious of that and of his motives, and he always seems to insert himself in these high-profile cases. And then, kind of nothing ever really goes anywhere with actually finding out about what happened in each case. And with Flint, the same thing sort of happened. That he was involved in this $1 million thing, and then Flint gets shot, and everything kind of dies away. But Flint, was from northern Kentucky. Miss Maddox was from northern Kentucky and also from Charleston and that area. She was back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
Northern Kentucky was sort of this gambling haven, going back to the old Ohio River days, the steamboats, and it still carries on today in bluegrass country with the horse racing and all of that. And there's definitely some conspiracies there that tie in with the bluegrass conspiracy book and those kinds of things. You have Michael Aquino, the famous mind control army guy.
Yeah. Oh, really?
He was in northern Kentucky in the early 70s.
Does he hail from there?
I don't know. Who knows? I mean, there's so many areas to explore here for people, anybody that's interested. Just grab one and look at it.
We dealt with Michael Aquino, I guess over a year ago when we were doing the series with the Collins brothers, and also for anybody who wants to go out there and see what he's done. I mean, this is a serious individual and one who makes no bones about being rather dedicated to Satan. Are you in agreement with that?
Yeah. you know, by the way, LaVey was photographed with John Kerry. I just saw that.
Oh, no. Really?
Kerry's related to his cousin, Ruth Payne, was Oswald's landlord lady.
Oh, hold on.
Yeah.
You know, Andrew, first of all, I love this.
But
well, the thing is, it's like Kevin Bacon. You know, all roads lead to him. Secondly, whenever we think we're going to do an interview with any kind of central point, you can't help but get into all these tributaries and everything that goes out. And so that's okay with me. I don't mind. I mean, you and I could probably, if you don't mind, probably do segments for the rest of our lives and never cover this territory. But now it gets even better. Lay this on me with Kerry and Oswald's landlord one more time.
Ruth Payne. I think her mother was. It may have been her mother. Let me see. Yeah, I don't know what I said before, but I think that it's either Ruth Payne or her mother, or is John Kerry's first cousin.
And Ruth Payne was the landlord?
Arthur Young's daughter, the inventor of the helicopter.
Oh, no.
And then you link over to Bell Helicopter in Dallas.
Okay.
Which had a lot of researchers think was one of the central planning locations for the assassination.
Okay.
Using Payne's husband, Michael. And you had Walter Dornberger, who was a Nazi who ran one of the big camps. He was the head of Bell. He came over after the war and was one of these paperclip scientists that was hired on.
This is good old Woody, right?
So many in Ohio, but in Texas as well. There's kind of a link between Ohio and Texas in various ways. One of which I found, and I don't know if I mentioned this before, but there was you have the Bhopal gas in Charleston being made by Union Carbide, and you have the Bhopal gas being made in Texas. Those are only two places, and that was funded by a joint operation between Union Carbide and Standard Oil of Indiana. And by the way, Neil Bush worked for Standard Oil of Indiana. And Neil Bush lived in Lubbock when Hinckley lived in Lubbock in those late 70s.
Yeah, that is true. And we're talking about, that would be Scott Hinckley. John's older brother.
Well, I thought John lived there in Lubbock.
Well, he might have both. All right, let me just say that the information I encountered was that back when, are we looking at the 70s per chance?
Yeah, late 70s.
Okay, that's what I thought too. That Scott in particular was in some kind of proximity to Neil Bush, and it might have been even Shrub too. I'm not sure, but certainly Neil. I mean, the point is this: we are agreed on the fact that the Hinckley family, of whose son John was a shooter in the Reagan situation, were very tight to the Bush clan. Correct?
Right.
All right.
And this, one of the things that happened while we were away, you and I, was this anniversary of the Reagan shooting. Wasn't it the 25th?
It was in March of 80. Is that right? March 80 or 81?
I thought it was 81. I think this was the 25th anniversary, and there wasn't much coverage, was there?
No, there wasn't, of course. I didn't see anything at all. And you're right, it would be 81 because obviously with the way the presidents are inaugurated in the odd year, though they may be, obviously elected in the even year, November of 80. Yeah, March 81, Reagan gets popped, Hinckley's the shooter.
Right, so Bush is scheduled to appear at the Washington Hilton on that day, and then suddenly his advisors, his handlers, realized that was the anniversary of Reagan being shot there, and that, of course, would bring up some unpleasant correlation. So he suddenly decides to go to Cancun instead, where he meets with Vincente Fox, who he vacations with, apparently for a week solid every year. Their families are very close.
Well, yeah. Well, we're all brothers now.
And Fox, of course, has worked tirelessly to make sure that we have as many illegal immigrants coming over as possible. And I guess there's some drug allegations.
Oh, believe me, yeah. I mean, that government is as famously corrupt as our own. And believe me, they have been very facilitous for drug runners, as I know from Westies, Irish wise guys in New York, and I've stated this on shows before about making sure that drugs got into the United States, and with also the help of the military during the days when they were funding Iran-Contra-gate. So no doubt.
Another thing that happened was 2 weeks after that, you had the Pope getting stabbed that same year, 81, and
was he stabbed or was he shot
Well, was he stabbed or shot?
He was shot by some, that guy just got out, by the way.
That guy, Acha, however you say his name.
Yeah, no.
Who became a media poster boy there for a while and then kind of disappeared the day we re-arrest him. I haven't followed what happened to it, but he was, Mae Russell said that the shooter had links to Bulgarian secret police and da-da-da-da-da, but she kind of blamed she connected the two events. She thought that the same organization did both shootings, and that it was tied to high-level Catholics like Alexander Haig, and that they were applying pressure to the Vatican. And then, sure enough, there was a big shift in the Vatican investments after that to American companies, some of which were like Trojan condoms and things that weren't even supposed to be, Catholic.
Yeah, in their support.
Investments.
Yeah.
They did anyway. So there was. Like this worldwide kind of crime network that kind of ties into the church and the oil companies and CIA and so forth, that they were behind, scaring the living daylights out of both Reagan and the Pope.
Well, on this show, and because it's obviously a vestige of what I believe, I will tell you that nobody shakes the Pope, and nobody shakes the Vatican. I mean, the popes come, the popes go. The Vatican, the Jesuits are always there. That is an interesting scenario about John Paul getting popped, because we've always wondered about what that might have been. And if it was done by a Bulgarian, the Eastern Orthodox Church, I think, has always been on the outs more or less with the Vatican. I got to bring that up with John Eric Phelps.
Exactly, and they're involved with the wandering bishops.
Oh yeah, boy! I tell you what, I got to have Lavenda on, because when I hear him talk about the wandering bishops, I'm saying to myself, man, are you talking about the Jesuits? Honestly, I mean, New York City, the whole thing. Yeah, good point.
The Jesuits.
Huh?
Were you finished?
Who are the Jesuits?
The Jesuits. I wanted to throw this out before I forgot it, because it's fading out of my brain as I...
All right, go ahead.
The Jesuits. November 11th, 1966 was the day the Mothman was first sighted. That's the same exact day that the Pope called out the Jesuits. I just found this in one of Emmanuel Josephson's books. He was, I think his name was thrown out on your show by one of your other guests.
Would it have been Lavenda?
No.
Okay.
He was talking about, it was a Christian fellow. I think he was talking about Rockefellers quite a bit.
Okay.
How the Rockefellers had started World War I, World War II, funded the Bolsheviks, everything else in between. And I think that was where he mentioned Josephson, so I didn't get all of them, but I got about 4 Josephson books. A Jewish doctor from New York, who I guess his ancestor had fought. He talked a lot about how there were certain Jewish investors or just regular people who had sold everything for the revolution.
Mm-hmm.
It was 1776. Given all their money to the revolution, and so he sort of had this patriotic zeal about it, and he really disliked Rockefeller and wrote these muckraking books, which have all kinds of interesting things in them. And they're a little outrageous at times because he speaks in this Cold War terminology, calling people communists and so forth, and stuff that we today kind of wonder about. But some of the factual points he makes are interesting. Like Rockefeller was behind the Museum of Modern Art. I didn't know that. So, but I have been talking about art, the art world, and the manipulation of it by the oil people and chemical people. I believe I mentioned D.D. Wilsey before, who's a Dow heiress. Dow and Bayer are now the 1 and 2 big chemical companies, and they're the ones who run the carbide operation in Charleston now. They're the two that, so basically have the biggest chemical company running the show in West Virginia today.
Well,
and Wilsey was married to, D.D. Wilsey was married to Al Wilsey, who was a milk guy, big milk purveyor. And one of the things I realized was that when I was a kid, they always talked about what did they have at the plant in case there's a big chemical explosion. All they had was milk for people. Didn't have any, health facilities for in case there was an explosion or something. Just milk. Give the guys milk, send them home. And I started thinking maybe that was just a scam to sell milk.
Yep.
And that's how ridiculous it gets when you come to the Kanawha Valley and the kinds of things that are done there, and the because the people aren't are so downtrodden and they can't fight it, I guess.
Well, going back to who are the Jesuits?
Yeah, tell me about. I mean, that is an interesting synchronicity to me. What did that mean? I don't know that much about the Jesuits, but maybe you know.
All right. Well, I know from what I am not the initial researcher. Eric John Phelps and Charles Wilcox expressly have gone back in time, and they've written 2 books. Phelps has written Vatican Assassins. Wilcox has written Transformation of the Republic. In both cases, they've gone back and they've pulled out historical records. I mean, they're not blowing us off on just what they think or what's been written in some texts. I mean, they go back. I mean, Wilcox especially goes back and pulls out correspondences that he happened fortuitously to come upon, and also ripped from New York. New York was one of the newspapers. United States newspapers, article upon article back in the 19th century about warning the United States citizenry about the intrigues of the Vatican and the Jesuit order. Now, this always sounds nuts, as I thought it was once upon a time, and because I feel if I'm going to call somebody nuts, I better check it out, I found out that both Phelps and Wilcox were right. That across time and across centuries, there's been no other entity like the Jesuit order, which everybody thinks is spiritual, and in fact it's military, it's not spiritual. That's why their head is called the Jesuit General. You want to talk about New World Order? You want to talk about one world government? These are the characters. And I'm pinning them directly because of the works that those individuals did, that they are the ones who send down the orders, that there is somebody who sits on top of the dunghill, and it certainly is Vatican Inc. and the Jesuits, which is the muscle. I mean, the Vatican is just a pretty picture. So, across time, if you would read recent books and such, their footprints are absolutely erased. But if you go back in time, and I'll give you one in particular, which is Burke McCarty's 1929 book called The Suppressed Truth About the Assassination of Abraham Lincoln. And let me just give you this as an example, and listeners have heard this. But Andrew, she writes in this in 1929, at this moment, Jesuits are in Japan instigating anti-American sentiment for a future war. She writes this in 1929. Lucky guess? So my point is that those who have the most to lose by exposure to their workings are the ones who can most completely hide their presence through media outlets, information outlets, books, textbooks, mass information. And I'm pinning it directly on a send-down from the Vatican and the Jesuit order. The Jesuits are the muscle. They actually get things done. And it sounds nuts to you, I'm sure. But if you look back, as I did, and as others have who have challenged me, they look and they say, yes, this in fact is true. Does that kind of help you at all?
Sure, yeah. I know that in relation to Mothman, you have the Phoenix program, and I think I mentioned that the Jesuits, some of the priests in the outlying areas of Vietnam, were switched out with CIA guys. Mm-hmm. And so there seems to be direct communication going on.
Oh, sure.
Between them and the CIA.
Since you
one of the interesting things I found out about Puhar. Are we? Can we move on?
Whatever you want to do. Go ahead.
It just reminded me of Puharik for some reason. Really kind of doesn't have anything to do with Catholicism, I guess. But Puharik was in. I mentioned earlier about the cancer research that was going on, and right around the time my dad got cancer. I guess it ties in with the Catholics in that some of the person I'm going to talk about here is linked to them. Is that Puharik was working with Uri Geller, and I just got this book. I got his book on Geller called Uri, and he leaves Israel where Uri was, and he was traveling around with Uri, and all these crazy things were happening. They were seeing UFOs every day, and they would record tapes on which this voice would appear on the tape and tell them things, and this voice was called Spectra. It's very similar to the things I was mentioning earlier that Philip K. Dick had experiences with, Valis and John Lilly with Echo. This disembodied UFO consciousness that's circling the Earth in a spacecraft. And so Puharik was caught up in all this. And I tend to think he was he's telling the truth in a way. I mean, it's hard to know because he did have a lot of CIA contracts that he was working on. All this research became classified the minute he did it. So the fact that we have a couple of books where he talks about his research is really kind of nice, and one would guess that was purely an accident of the 70s, and how open things were that his books, did get out. His research got out. Otherwise, today it would certainly all be classified. You wouldn't know a thing about what these scientists are finding out about the paranormal. But, we're talking about a scientist with NASA, CIA connections following around a UFO contactee and doing, really close examination of it, and trying to find out what's going on. And in the middle of all this, he leaves and goes back to, guess where? Maryland. Germantown, Maryland, right where, I was saying earlier that the cancer, this cancer kind of biowarfare was being planned.
Is that around Fort Detrick?
Right. I mean, I don't know. I haven't checked to see where Germantown is. But the date is enough for me. I mean, it certainly is caught my attention. Let's say that. And who does he meet with? Werner von Braun, who I talked about in the beginning, was head of NASA security with an office in Columbus, and has been in the conspiracy world linked to NASA security has been linked to the JFK assassination. Also, Puharik met with Edgar Mitchell, the famous UFO astronaut, if you will. Mm-hmm. He's had all the different conferences. You'll find him at conferences with Stephen Greer and John Mack before he died. I actually went to a couple of these. Pushing the ET thesis. And von Braun was CEO of Fairchild at the time. Fairchild was the big chip maker, which later became, that was basically where the computer chip was invented. And the founder, or the guy that really took the company to great heights, recently died. I think he died last year. Forget his name. But Fairchild was this company that could make these chips, and that Puhar could use the chips. I think they actually were using one of his barns, or he was sharing space with them at one time in Pennsylvania, or Maine. May have been Maine. Kind of near where Wilhelm Reich was working. And so you see, and Fairchild had links with LTV, which is another Dallas-based company.
Hold on, we're talking about LTV. Well, I'll tell you what. My wife worked for LTV. Are we talking about what eventually became the steel people?
LTV with James Ling.
Yeah, Ling had what? He had the. All right, hold on. Ling had what? The harbor things. He had the tugs and stuff like that. Is that right?
He had all kinds of things going on. But he started out the minute I read his bio, I knew he was CIA because he was in the Navy. He was one of these guys that was quote unquote recovering things from German subs.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. So they were trying to find the coding. You know, he was one of these guys that was looking for the code box. All
right. What LTD did is through the 80s, when things got weird with steel and stuff like that. Republic, I think that was the Republic, got bought out. There were mergers and such, and my wife, who worked in that industry, wound up working for LTD. So that's the same LTD without a doubt. So and it was Ling. There's no two ways about it. So he's in the mix as well, eh?
Yes. And the minute I saw his bio, I'd never heard of the guy, but when he died, they had a thing in the New York Times about him, and you could just tell by the wording of the article that he was CIA, because they were dancing around, you know, his bio, trying to explain how things happened the way they did. You know, so he's in the Navy, he gets out, he's obviously doing spy work, and he's supposedly selling stuff out of his garage. And within a year, he's got this, you know, burgeoning electronics company that goes on to change, quote, the way corporations organize. So this is a guy who had, you know, his influence on the corporate world was immense. And really what it amounted to was that he came up with all the new accounting scams that they're using today.
Enron.
And this is Ling was the guy that came up with these, and it's all Dallas. Dallas. Just time and again, there's so much, you know, defense stuff going on there. Basically, the mob from Chicago moved down there when they were run out of Chicago. That's the story, at least.
That's right. I'm going to say that's the story. I won't belabor this, but now it's come back to me. My wife worked for Jones and Lachlan. They merged with Republic, and together they were owned by LTV. That's how that happened. And they were most assuredly out of Texas, as you stated. And I only knew them to be involved with, like, tugs and harbor stuff. But it all fits in. So now I got that straight. She'll be interested in hearing that because for obvious reasons. And, Chicago, and also, weren't the mob bosses of Chicago and Dallas prominent in Kennedy's assassination? One is Marcellus?
Yes, I mean...
and Traficante. Oh, he was from Miami, though. That's right.
I just think it's helpful for people who are trying to look at that whole thing to... You know, when I first started, it made a lot of sense. The mob was, Chicago changed. You know, originally it had this mob structure that had some... I read a book about this once, and how there actually was a culture in Chicago, a street culture, neighborhood culture with lots of shops and different ethnic foods and a certain amount of culture based on mob rule, which allowed the average person to go to the local mobster and ask for favors. Once the bureaucracy took over, what's happening, Chicago is kind of ruled on the one hand by the Catholics and on the other hand by the British. I forget which one, but the big newspaper there is basically a British owned. It's British owned. And if you're interested in that, Chicago, I look at. He's a little out there, but he's the guy in the wheelchair. What's his name?
Skolnick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You can't trust everything he says, but
that's true.
some of it is good stuff. But he kind of lays out the sort of basic thing about Chicago that is understandable. But once the church, if you will, in league with the British, and usually these two are fighting, but they've kind of come to some peace in Chicago, and I guess there's little wars that break out every now and then. But once you had this bureaucracy take over, suddenly people didn't have a way to really address their issues in Chicago.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The street life of Chicago basically died. So today you still have little pockets of it in some of the suburbs. I lived there for a summer.
What a surprise!
To experience it a little bit.
Well, also realize that when the Kennedy election was rigged, and of course it was the bashing of Chicago and the environs that threw it his way.
Yes.
And also Wilcox in his Transformation of the Republic also recounts the Romanist element in and around Upper Illinois, Wisconsin, at the turn of the century and into the 20th. So it's not without any kind of beyond any kind of theory that in fact the Romanist Church definitely held sway up there and probably did bring in the election for Kennedy. And as far as the mob goes, who knows really. But I think they take their marching orders as well. So, moving on. Go ahead, Andrew.
Well, to connect, to give a little personal anecdote about Chicago. At the time I was there, I came down with a rare, strange illness, and this was the same year that I took the photo of what may be some kind of man in black in my yard, which I'm going to post on my site.
Okay.
And that link that I gave you to that gallery, there'll be this picture there. So there were lots of UFO sightings occurring in Charleston, but I was in Chicago for a summer working with school jobs, different jobs they give to students in the program. And came down with a strange illness that they said was like leukemia. I was in the hospital. I was put under some tests one morning that scared the it was almost like a flashback. I don't think I was ever abducted.
Right.
Wasn't ever on the lab table, but I felt like it that day.
Yep, I got you.
Had a real strong reaction to it. I just snuck out of the hospital and went back home. Called my country doctor, who told me, "Don't worry about it. You're fine." But a year later, I changed schools and went to Marshall University, where I was studying with Ralph Turner, who was one of the reporters covered the Mothman originally. Great professor, opened my eyes to a lot of things. Took my blood in bio class, and I still had super irregular white blood cells. I mean, the professor. I was looking at my blood and seeing these cells, and the professor drew the different kinds of cells you would see on the board. And he said, "If you have any of these, pack up your stuff. You're not going to live very much longer." I mean, it was like that. The one end of the scale is the worst possible white blood cell you could have. I was looking at him in my blood, and I just remember it was a very scary moment for me. And I just I just blocked it out and moved on, and I was able to recover. And it turns out that kind of a weird blood problem is very common in UFO contactees.
All right.
But yet I don't have any specific knowledge other than this thing that I took a photo of out of the window. There was a crop circle. And this was before crop circles were known. I didn't know what it was. I just knew that it looked very unusual, and I was taking time exposures of it. It was very dark out. And in one of the negatives, there's this person who shouldn't have been there. And I'm wondering if maybe I got exposed to, because you can almost see the energy in the photograph. You can see a ring of energy, like a whirlpool. And Puharich talks about this in his research, that the forms that psi plasma takes are these circles. And he's actually got a diagram of how he thinks psi plasma operates. Because its basic importance is that it moves electrons. Because otherwise, there would be no manifestation. If there wasn't movement in the psi plasma causing electrons to spin, you wouldn't have anything happening. You'd just have, like, I don't know, purgatory, I guess. But these circles, that's what I took a photo of. And by the way, it's just very similar to and I have these on that link. It's very similar to a drawing of Ezekiel's wheel from 1,000 years ago. Puharich's drawing looks just like a part of the drawing of Ezekiel's wheel, and this wheel had a winged being with 4 animal faces standing on it.
Yep.
And in my estimation, it's very similar to the Thunderbird. The idea of the Thunderbird, not being able to see the Thunderbird in its totality at any given moment. It's impossible for a human to see the Thunderbird in its totality. And that's kind of what led to doing the photo show for me, is trying to show it in its totality using all these different images. But anyway, I was in this hospital, got this weird blood disease in Chicago. My girlfriend at the time was living in northern Kentucky, and I was staying at her house at this time. And I was sleeping in the basement. I woke up out of a deep sleep, realized something was wrong, went to the window, sliding glass basement door with access to the outside. There were 2 guys coming in with masks on. They had broken the light outside and were coming in to do harm to somebody. And somehow I had woken up and known this way before they'd gotten there. And I did what I could and turned on all the lights, and the guys ran off. And then my girlfriend told me that she had done a couple of years earlier, they had done a seance in that room that I was in, and that they had all had a vision of, trying to remember what the vision was. It was some kind of angelic being. So they had all these girls had seen this thing, and some of them had had effects like their necklaces had been burned off. I mean, these are real serious, heat effects things. So I don't, I'm not sure what the connection was. Maybe that's where I got the exposure. I don't know.
But you said that the activity you had in your white blood count was not unusual with those who had claimed to be abductees. Is that correct?
Right. That's straight from Keel.
Yeah, I got it. Okay. All I'm saying is that, whether they were abducted or not, I'm thinking, as you say this, of course, this is the first time I've heard it, that what might all of you have been obviously exposed to, other than the abductee situation. In other words, there's something going on here. You know what I mean, Andrew? I mean, I'm not making fun of this by any way, shape, or form. Something's going on. And, in just talking to you, which I love, because, I mean, what you've been through and what you've researched, goes in a million different directions and very deep down every route. And I think it's got to be talked about. And I'm trying to make sense, not necessarily make sense of it, but after this show is done, I got to think about this also, because what in the world is going on? Because I do definitely give you complete credibility, and you've seen things, and you've been in touch with people. What are we dealing with here? Is this the elephant in the dark bedroom? You know what I mean? I'll take that as a yes.
It's the psi plasma, I think. It's very isolated, and yet it's very generalized at the same time.
Well, okay, so we can say that part of it, we'll never get this thing done. We'll do as long as you're willing, we'll do like 55 parts to this show. But
I think we've gotten through about a tenth of what I wrote before, so we probably can get 10
million shows
segments out.
Well, all right.
Zillion,
okay.
yeah.
But there's two things. I mean, we're dealing with not flesh and blood, as it would say in Scripture, but principalities of darkness. I mean, those who rule the air. But we're also dealing with those who are involved with it on, I would say, a governmental or a bureaucratic level. I mean, you know what I'm saying? I mean, we're dealing with the supernatural, and let's face it, supernatural is not theory. It's real. So we're dealing with that, but we're also dealing with the extensions of those who may be empowered or otherwise, walking the earth. Are you okay with that, statement?
Yeah. The interesting thing about Puharich is that he's really looking at how this stuff operates scientifically, and the telepathy and the supernatural, at least in the terms of telepathy, is proven in a lab. I mean, it's absolutely proven. It's been proven time and time again.
Sure.
Puharich had cages where he would place famous psychics and had test their abilities to project information in and out. And that's, I think, where the legend comes from in Montauk, that they had this chair that you could sit in, and that it could amplify telepathy and end up sending signals into the psi-plasma that can be picked up by others, and that may account for the various messages that I've gotten from my father through Harriet. Harriet's always getting messages about all kinds of people all the time.
Mm-hmm.
She thinks there's an earthquake coming, and there's been a lot of talk on the Mothman list. By the way, I want to talk about a different Mothman list. I need people to have a change of a little errata to work on.
All right, let's do this. I mean, you always bring up good stuff at the end of the show.
Yeah.
That's okay. It's great. It's a great teaser for another time. But we're running out of it. So why don't we do this? I've been remiss in talking about the website and the documentary. So if you would, for the rest of the time, Andrew, and we'll pick this up again, why don't you tell us about the website, also about the documentary, and the other information that you want people to know about as we continue.
Okay. In terms of Mothman lists, I mentioned a list before that is no longer in existence. They've changed names and they've gone away from the Mothman a little bit. So I've started a new list called Mothman Live.
Okay.
There's only a few members right now, but I'm hoping more people can sign on. Just put a Grassy Knoll under the reason why you want to join.
Okay.
And you'll be in.
All right. Good.
We had as I mentioned to you before we went on, there was a delay in the book, the photo book. Our designer, this is a nice little touch. The designer kind of dropped the ball for about 2 or 3 months, and nothing happened. So we've got a new designer, but the old designer worked for McCann Erickson in New York prior to coming to Seattle. McCann Erickson got its start by being Rockefeller's advertising company.
You never disappoint me.
Yeah.
That's great.
So, what does that mean? I don't know.
Right.
But it's interesting. And but the book is back on, and we've got the Mothman DVD is being transcribed. We've got it almost done. I've got a student from UCLA who's a photo grad student who's transcribing it, and almost done. So that's looking up, and I'm excited.
All right.